incumbent Steve Smith for Mosquito Control, District 3. First question will go to Bill Becker. Here you go, Bill.
Question for Steve Smith. Steve, you chaired the Mosquito Control Board for a number of years, tumultuous years. We saw the several board members at odds with the executive director, very public statements, really at odds. Looking back, would you have done anything differently, or were you pleased with the way things played out?
You know, that's a very interesting question, and it's come up a couple times in these forums. I think everyone should be aware that when we hired the director, which we're referring to, it was a unanimous decision by all commissioners across party lines to hire him on the salaries he was paid and on the raises he got. He had some issues with a couple of the other commissioners, something about which, you know, we commissioners can't really talk to each other about why we have an issue with the director. But I am of the full belief that the commissioners that had issues should have sat down one-on-one with Ed Fussell, looked it out, and they should come to some resolution versus, you know, continuously throwing barbs at each other. Ed came on board when we were broke. We had no money. He said we were doing the wrong kind of mosquito control here, and he changed what we were doing, which did incur expense in the beginning. But after we made those changes, over the period of his tenure, we saved a little over 17 million taxpayer dollars. So what he did was good. The fact that he was a little abrasive and with Bill and with Commissioner Goodell, I don't apologize for that because I don't know why they did not get along. I've been one of these people that gets along with everybody, including Commissioner Goodell and Commissioner Shaw. So I wish they had buried the hatchet and gotten along with, you know, gotten on with their lives. It would have made it a lot easier for everybody.
You're gonna have to separate this at some point. Mr. Smith, I've been trying to catch up with the newspaper articles concerning proposed tax hikes. And I understand that you voted against the proposed 6% tax hike recently. Am I correct about that?
Correct, yes.
Going through my notes. Did you also vote against the 10% pay cut for board members?
No, I did not.
Okay. And I'm still confused about the statements that you've kind of repeatedly made about Ed's governance and leadership leading to a savings of $17 million over a certain period of time. It's my understanding that you're still spending from reserves. Is that going to change in the next budget cycle? Is the tax hike that's been proposed related to building up reserves again? I mean, I'd just like to know your general thoughts about in particular reserve spending.
I'll be glad to share that with you. I think, again, we need to spin the time clock back a little bit. When I was elected, we did 80% insecticide use and about 20% use of a larvicide called Alticid. It was big briquettes that they threw into the water. It works in certain areas, but it did not work in most of the keys. Shortly after I was elected, we bought $1 million worth of Alticid, and we're told that would last for a year. After it had a countywide failure in May of my first year in office, the superintendent told me that they had been having problems with that chemical for a year and a half, and we were misled to buy it. When Ed came on board, he said, we need to switch to a larvicide called BTI. We can put it in water. It's impregnated in cost. It's highly effective, and the cost is about 20% of what we were spending for Alticid. So we dropped from spending in the $300 an acre for a larvicide to about $11 to $12 an acre. That's where you hear me talking about the money that we began to save. During that period of time, we had to change the type of equipment we were using, modify what we were using on our aircraft. We had to replace the old DC-3, and we had to replace some of the older helicopters. That is where we did increase taxes in years back. But you are correct. This year I voted against that tax increase. It was my intention for us to try to adopt rollback, and Commissioner Goodman, I think, sided with me on that. Rollback would have allowed us to move money out of a reserve for sick and vacation time to make up that amount of money. So, he's going to be on.
a question for both of you, and Stephen, you can answer it first. You have the beetles, the crickets, Adam and the ants, and the roaches. What are your plans to get a major rock and roll band named after Mosquito? The budget of the Mosquito Control District is larger than the budget of Florida Keys Community College. Why does it cost so much to kill mosquitoes in the Florida Keys, and are there any specific strategies that you would implement to allow us to spend less to do that? Stevie.
It does cost a lot. And of course the overall concern of any board member on this board would to be ensured that the citizens of Monroe County, the tourists, the children are all protected. Another situation we have in this county, as you know, is it's 125 miles long. We have more than one office. We've got one in Key West, Marathon, Tavernier. And you do have to staff those. There are issues with the office building here, and there's major issues with the new office building in Marathon that was also going to be very expensive to have addressed. The facility in Tavernier is an okay place. It's not very big, but we've got a second floor at the new, as they call it, the Taj Mahal in Marathon. We've got that sitting vacant. A lot of our employees could go there. If about half of them live in Key West and half live north of the office between College Road and between there and Marathon. So I know we probably need some presence here with our trucks and different chemicals and things like that, but it is an expensive process. There are also, of course, areas that need to be cut, and those should have been addressed, and hopefully will be after I get on the board.
One of the expenses that we incur to do mosquito control here in the Keys is that we are a 124-mile-long island, as Mr. Hammond said. We have offices in Key Largo, not Tavernier, Marathon, and Key West. We have to work our mosquito control around U.S. Fish and Wildlife, wilderness lands, which we now have access to some of them. We have state wilderness lands we don't have access. We work with the Nature Preserve. We work with the Heron Refuge. We work with the Key Deer Refuge. We have so many challenges that most mosquito control districts do not have. The other thing we have is we're fighting freshwater and salt marsh mosquitoes. So we have two different types of mosquito control that we do. Do we have a high budget? We do have a high budget. But we have to be like a fire department. We have to be ready to respond. When we have a rain incident here or a weather incident, we have 3 days to get out to do larviciding, to get the larvae treated in the water before they emerge as an adult. When they come out as an adult, not only can they carry disease, but it quadruples the cost of the mosquito control and the nuisance factor. So we have to keep, a strong budget there. We have aircraft, 2 twin-engine turboprops. We have 4 helicopters, but they all have the same engine, so at least we don't keep multiple engines. So yes, one day I would like to think we could have a very low budget, but if you really look over every item in that, there's not a lot of waste.
Steve Hammond. One area that seems to be off the table, and it was Mosquito Control is the only government agency that gives all its employees a housing allowance. And I would have to guess most of the people who work there grew up here. The commissioners got rid of their housing allowances last year when the public discovered it. Steve, what's your take on employee housing allowances?
Thank you. Last year when Phil Goodman came on board, it was brought to the board's attention. Not only had it been, I think it was initiated in 2005, but the board actually agreed to increase that to $200 a month. The employees still get that, and as you said, last year or a year and a half ago, that issue was addressed, and they did remove that. I know of no other facility that does that. Occasionally, the Navy or military personnel come in, they do get some type of an adjustment, but it's something that's got to be looked at. I don't know how many of you here are getting a housing allowance, but I know of no one. And it really should have never been put in place to begin with. It was bad judgment. It was good times and money was coming in, and it's going to have to be addressed maybe over a certain number of year period to reduce that back down, but strongly against it.
Question for Steve? Steve Smith. Steve Ed and Steve.
Okay.
Steve, now that Food and Drug Administration has agreed to take regulatory oversight of the genetically modified mosquitoes and Oxytec, are you in favor of moving ahead with trials of those mosquito releases in Key West?
You know, that's interesting. I've not seen a letter that they have signed off on. I know that they verbally had said that they were giving serious consideration to taking oversight. I honestly feel that there is a place for genetic modified mosquitoes in mosquito control. I don't believe our community is the right community to do the testing. I don't think that there has been enough independent testing done on that. The testing that has been done on the releases, which they did in the Cayman Islands, Peru and Brazil, the testing was done by primarily Oxytec, which has, of course, we all know, a vested interest in that success of that particular product. And it is a product. But I was talking to people tonight, if it ever happened, it would only be in a couple block area. And believe it or not, every mosquito release would be dusted with different colors of fluorescent dust. And we would have traps set up all around the area to see where they're going. But again, I would not right now vote to support it. I don't think there's enough science behind it to make me feel that it is the best way to do it. So the alternative is very labor intensive, door-to-door mosquito domestic inspection and dumping water in people's yards.
Let me turn that around and ask Stephen. Do you agree with Steve on that? How would you differ from him on the issue of GM mosquitoes?
Well, I think the important thing that we need to remember is that we need to continue to search any and all new possibilities and new technologies that are out there or are on the leading edge of it. If we can get anything that will help reduce the larvicides, pesticides, chemicals that are put on us, I think it's worth looking into. I don't think we should rule out any possibilities. There was even one that Ollie on the other side mentioned is a mosquito that eats the larva. That's a good possibility. Why rule something out? At least we have an executive director that seems to be forward-thinking and looking for those new possibilities. As far as the genetically altered mosquito, I do not believe that we are at any point ready to release any of that from the studies that we've seen from Oxytec. I do think that they ought to continue looking into it just as another alternative, or maybe find some other alternative from working with what they're doing now.
Stephen, I have a question for you. Most recently, I've seen some letters, not most recently, it's been in the past couple of years, letters to the editor, calls to the Citizen's Voice from folks who live north of Stock Island, and they talk about the response of the mosquito control outside, particularly what we would call the urban area or the more densely populated area of Key West. How would you address those concerns?
Are you saying they're not getting the attention?
Well, I'm saying that people feel that they're not getting the attention they deserve. So I guess it's a two-part question. Do you think they're correct about that? And if you do think they're correct about that, how would you as a board member influence policy to address those concerns of those constituents?
Well, I will say, I think the employees at the district are very highly trained. They're very good employees. The response time that I've seen from the mosquito control district has always been very good. All of the board members currently want to maintain that, the quick response. And I'm not familiar with it. I know in the upper Keys, they're sometimes those mosquitoes that drive the car, they're brutal up there. But there also could be in areas that are around more spray zones where they're not allowed to spray, or certain chemicals can only be sprayed so many times a year, and they're working around that.
Thank you, guys.